So let's get straight into it. Typically, when somebody buys an LS, the question that they always ask is, which LS is the best LS to buy? I kind of briefly covered that subject in my first video talking about the LS, and for those of you who are astute, I tend to make explainer videos on things I have future projects for. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But most people tend to want to know what LS is the best LS to buy. And there are tons of different RPO codes out there. There's like 40 of them. And so it can get a little confusing, and everybody has like their own personal feelings about what you should or shouldn't buy. So what's my answer to that question? Well, disclaimer, my answer to that question is not the definitive 100% only way of doing things. There are probably more knowledgeable people out there. There are probably other people who have things to add to the conversation. So comment that. I'm not the authority here, but I'm just telling you from my decision making, the best LS RPO codes you could go after are the LY6, LQ9, and the LQ4. Now, all of these engines are 6-liter engines, and what I'm not saying is that you shouldn't look at 6.2s, because at the end of the day, there is no replacement for displacement. Just the bigger motor is better. And so if you can find a 6.2 for the price of a 6.0, buy that motor. Absolutely, hands down, just buy that motor. But realistically, you're not going to find a 6.2 for the same price as a 6.0. It's just not going to happen. And so from my logic, how I look at it is the 6.0 is 97% of the size of the 6.2s. If we are modding both a 6.0 and a 6.2, mod for mod, band for band, identical, the 6.2 motor will make more power, but 3% more power. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, how much is that 3% more power really worth to you? And we're going to get back to that because I had to ask myself that same exact question. Now, when choosing which 6.0 you should go with, I really agree with Muhammad Ali from Coverman66.
I am the greatest.
Now, when choosing which 6-liter LS you should go with, I really agree with Terry from Coverman66. On his channel, he's done all types of LS stuff, and he was hugely helpful to me in my build. Now, I'm not going to rip off his video. Please just go to his channel, watch some of his videos. He makes great content, and he has tons of insight, so go check him out. But when thinking about the LY6, the thing that I like about the LY6, and that Terry seems to like too, is that they come from the factory with LS3 heads. These heads are the best factory cylinder head that GM made for the LS series engine. Now, if you're building an engine like mine where it's not a race engine, you're just trying to build a fun street car, what these cylinder heads have on offer is more than you will ever need. Another point that I always like to emphasize with people when planning for your swap, and the driveway engineer says this too, so go check out his channel. His channel's awesome. Subscribe over there. Is make sure you get the most complete engine that you can. You don't want an engine that doesn't have cylinder heads but it's a built bottom end, because at the end of the day, that engine's going to nickel and dime you. So what you should do is look for an engine that runs and drives in the donor car, because if it runs and drives in that car, why won't it run and drive in yours? So that's just going to save you so much headache and so much time. Just get the most complete engine you can. Speaking of complete engines, that's exactly what I did. My engine is a LQ9 from a 2006 Escalade with about 160,000 miles, maybe 159. I don't remember exactly. It's in that area. For those of you who have been around the channel since the beginning, this shouldn't be a surprise to you. This engine comes from my friends over at Economy Auto. When I bought my engine, Jim out at Economy Auto actually gave me a pick of 3 different engines that were out and ready to go, full harness, everything. One of them was an L92 for $1,800. The second engine was a LQ9 for $600. Yes, that's the engine I bought. And then the last one was an LQ4 for $550. At the end of the day, the L92 is the best engine. It was just the better engine. But the question I had to ask myself was that extra 3% of potential performance really worth 3 times the price? And no, it wasn't. So at the end of the day, I brought home that LQ9. So why did I choose the LQ9 over the LQ4? The best way to think about it is that since the LS is a modular engine platform, you probably have seen people mixing and matching parts all over the place. Well, GM actually did that in the factory. The best way to think about the LQ9 is that it is an LQ4 with a LS2's rotating assembly. So it has the same exact iron block as the LQ4, but it has the pistons from the LS2, which are flat top and gives it a higher compression ratio. And then it also has full floating, stronger Gen 4 rods, even though this is a Gen 3 engine. So to me, all of those differences were worth paying an extra $50. So this LQ9 I made a whole bunch of upgrades to. So we're going to talk about how I took it from being an Escalade engine to the engine that I have sitting in front of us today. So one of the biggest things when you're swapping any engine is to know where the oil sump's going to be. E34s and E30s, a few other BMWs have front sump oil pans. So whatever your car's factory engine has, it's probably in your best interest to continue to use that setup. And as you can see on the E34, there's a whole bunch of junk in the way. So you are kind of forced into using a front sump oil pan. My oil pan is a CX Racing E30 LS oil pan, and I got it for $400. It is the wildest story that I've ever had on Facebook Marketplace. So I was basically on Facebook Marketplace, you know, as you do, and I saw an E30 LS swap oil pan, and I messaged the dude. Plot twist, dude lives in New York. And in the chat, he's like, hey, I'm going to be out of town for the next few weeks, so you're going to have to wait until I get back from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So at this point, it dawns on me, oh, dang, I messaged somebody who is not in my state. But plot twist part 2, I live like 30 minutes outside of Grand Rapids. So bro was a complete legend, took the oil pan, all the parts, pickup tube, and put it in a suitcase, and then met me at the airport, and we exchanged parts. It's the craziest thing I've ever done on Facebook Marketplace, but we got an oil pan. The next part of our oiling equation was to upgrade the oil pump. According to Mellling, who makes a whole bunch of oil pumps, the stock factory LS oil pump runs into cavitation issues when you go over like 6,000 RPM. So that's something that I wanted to be able to avoid because I do want to be able to run in higher RPM. So I started hunting around for an oil pump. And pretty much everybody online will tell you that you need to get the high volume, high pressure oil pump. So hearing that, I didn't do that. So no, but for real, I actually have a reason for that. So I had reached out to a shop that actually has a YouTube channel, Moto IQ, and I talked to them about my build, and I told them that I have an oil pan that has a 5.5 quart capacity. And they said something that I hadn't really heard in a whole lot of places on the internet, but that's why the guys out at Moto IQ are legends.
One of the things when you run a pump this big, I mean, this is the second best thing you can get to dry sump, is it could suck your oil pan dry. So your stock oil pump is, I mean, your stock oil pan's probably no bueno. You have to have a high capacity pan and windage tray and a crank scraper to get all that oil back. That, you know, all the good ones know this, but a lot of the, like your local shop guy kind of guys, they don't know about that non-priority main, and yeah, they might not set your clearances up right and not give you enough oil pump volume. And if they do, they might not know about the pan not holding enough. So sometimes it kind of helps to go with people that have a little bit more experience with actual racing.
Indeed.
Mike knows way more than I do, so I'm just going to go with what he said. So what I did was I picked up a Melling M295 oil pump. This is listed as a standard volume, standard pressure oil pump. But even though they say that, it's kind of not. It's actually 10% above the standard oil pressure, so you do get a little bump of oil pressure. And according to Melling, it will specifically guard against cavitation above 6,200 RPM. So that's exactly what I was looking for. This oil pump was $20 on Facebook Marketplace. Brand new in the box, unopened. Some guy bought it, and then he had sold his truck and then just held on to it forever. So that worked out. Now for Valvetrain and Cylinder Heads, this is actually where I spent a majority of my time, effort, and money on this engine. So as some of you might know from the last video, I actually have 2 Audi S4s, so I definitely have trauma surrounding timing chains. So I replaced the timing chain, even though I probably didn't need to. But this ended up working out because I paid $52 for a stock replacement timing chain, and they accidentally sent me a C5R timing chain. I called them, they didn't want it back. So yeah, that worked out. And then for my camshaft, I chose a used BTR PDS Stage 4 cam. And I had bought it off of a guy who had just upgraded his ZL1 to the V2 version, or the update to this camshaft. By the time it was all said and done and shipped and all that, it was about like $190, we'll just call it $200. Now, I know this is the point where everybody is going to freak out and say I chose the wrong camshaft. I'm well aware of that. Like, I completely understand it. I know people get emotional about camshafts, but I'm going to kind of explain myself here. When I talked to the shops locally around me, and I actually got on one of Richard Holtner's live streams and left a comment, and he kind of said the same thing. When you're looking at the difference between a PDS cam and an NA cam, the main difference is where they are targeting the torque to come in. And so on a positive displacement motor, because the blower is making all of this torque down low, the cam manufacturers will shift the torque production, or the torque curve, way out towards the end of the RPM range. So basically it'll make all of this top end power, but you're giving up low end power. And really, that is a trade-off that I'm willing to make. But if you are into competition or motorsports, it's probably best to choose the right cam for your application. If you are turbo, there are turbo cams. If you are supercharged, there are supercharged cams. If you're NA, there's NA cams. But for me, that was a trade-off I was willing to make to run a PDS cam in a NA car. Now for lifters, I upgraded to the Caddy race lifters, and I paid $490 for those, and then I paired them with some hardened push rods, and I got those from Michigan Motorsports. Yeah, go blue. And those were about $100. For my cylinder heads are 823 cylinder heads from a hybrid Denali. As I mentioned earlier, the 823 cylinder heads, or the rectangle port cylinder heads, are the factory cylinder head on the LY6. My cylinder heads came from Economy Auto once again, and they were $350. And then they immediately went out to a highly recommended machine shop local to me. So when they got my cylinder heads, they installed my dual valve springs I bought from Texas Speed. Those were $315. And then they also installed upgraded Manley intake and exhaust valves for the LS3. During the machining process, they decked the heads about 4 thousandths, and they also sold me some Cometic 040 head gaskets. Total, what I paid Northwestern for all of this stuff was $535. And then finally, and controversially, I used the PQY head studs. I don't know about these things. So straight out the gate, when I unboxed these and opened them up, I was actually missing one stud. So the LS cylinder heads have across the top, there are 5 bolts, or I guess in this case, when you're converting to studs, you have 5 studs across the top. I was missing one of the 8mm ones. And so how did I get around that? Should I return them? How should I proceed? So I called a whole bunch of shops to me locally, and they said that those 5 bolts across the top don't actually do anything for sealing the combustion chamber. And so because of that, it would be safe to just reuse factory bolts there. So what they recommended doing was putting a brand new factory bolt right in the middle of the cylinder head. Is that a good idea? Is it not? I don't know. I guess we'll see if my engine explodes. So maybe not the best way to go about it, but that's how I did it. When it comes to the actual install process of these, it actually went really well. I didn't follow the instructions in the box, and I didn't just go cowboy mode. In Rich's video on DeBoss Garage, he said to follow the instructions for the ARP studs, so that's exactly what I did. I got the ARP Ultra Torque Lube, and everything went on fine. Like, there's really no issues with my install. Now, that being said, some of my friends, after they saw how well things went with my install, bought the same stud kit for their swap. And they weren't as lucky as I was. So straight out the gate, again, they didn't have the right amount of bolts. They had too many. They probably got the bolts that I was missing. So I don't know what they're doing for quality control. But anyway, they got too many bolts. And then when actually installing them, they ran into a problem when they did the final torque pass, and they broke one of the studs inside the block. So where does that leave us? Well, I guess the question is, do I recommend using these? I mean, I don't know, probably not. I mean, we are firmly within the you get what you pay for territory, so you can make an adult decision here as to if that's what you want to do. And then finally, the engine is topped off with a intake manifold from a L76. The L76 has rectangle port heads just like the LS3. Now, if this intake manifold is exactly the same as the Corvette's is debatable. I've seen lots of talk about it online. It seems like there's a part number change at some point, but my particular intake manifold did come from a L76, but it's the same part number as a LS3 Corvette. I got mine for $75 from somebody who had just supercharged their G8. It was $75 shipped, so that was really easy. Now, when it comes to intake manifolds, everybody and their brother and their cousin and their mom's lesbian friend's cat has told me that I need to use an LSXR intake manifold. To me, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense for a budget build, and here's my logic. So when you look at actual dyno results, and Richard Holdner on his YouTube channel and in Hot Rod Magazine has done this test back to back. When you look at the results of a test of an LS3 versus an LSXR intake manifold, the performance just doesn't really make sense to me. The LSXR definitely does make more power, but when you look at the test results from Richard's test, it's only about an average of 2 horsepower more. And even if you want to go past Richard's test and want to go directly to what the manufacturer says, Fast says that this intake manifold should make 14 more horsepower and 11 more torque. But again, I don't really know if 14 horsepower is really worth paying $1,100 more dollars. If you can find a LS3 intake manifold for as cheap as I did, that's a no-brainer. 14 horsepower can be made up anywhere else for that amount of money. It's just not worth it to me. But again, if you are racing, you're into competition, you're probably not watching this channel, you know what I mean? Like, you're well beyond the scope of this channel. But if you are racing and you are building a competition motor, then yeah, get the LSXR intake manifold, because every little bit helps. But for somebody who's just building a fast and fun street car, it's probably not worth it. You could probably spend your money somewhere else. And that's exactly what I did. With all that extra money I'd saved, I actually got a Holley Terminator. This wasn't in my plans at all, but I ended up picking up a Holley Terminator from somebody on Facebook Marketplace locally for $450. They upgraded to a Dominator, so they didn't give me the harness because the harnesses are interchangeable. But that's alright, because I bought a harness for $300 on Facebook Marketplace again. So basically, I'm into a Holley Terminator for about $750, which is pretty good seeing how much money I just saved on the intake manifold. And then to get the power out of my LS and onto the street, I have a BMW transmission behind my Chevy motor. The gearbox or the transmission that I'm using is a GS653BZ. It comes from a 2008 BMW 335 that had about 80,000 miles on it. I bought that transmission for about $650. To connect that transmission to the LS motor, you need an adapter. I went through PMC Motorsports and I paid around $500 for the adapter. Now, my adapter kit is not complete. I just have the physical adapters that adapts the bell housings to come together, because I got that part for $500, which was on sale. So I still have yet to get the flywheel and the clutch, which I can do at any point through the process. It obviously does have a deadline, but I'm still kind of waiting to see if prices go up or down. And I also picked up a LS6 Valley cover for $125. These have the PCV integrated into the Valley cover instead of like on most LSs. LSs tend to have like really bad issues with quote-unquote blow-by, and the theory that I've heard is because the PCV pickup is sucking air from out of the valve covers, there's a whole lot of oil being splashed around by the rockers, that's getting sucked up by the PCV system, and then that's being thrown into your intake manifold. Whereas the LS6 has the PCV in the Valley cover, and there's a lot more obstruction to like an oil plume being sucked up, and there's also an oil air separator in there, and so then that way you're not sucking up so much oil into your intake manifold. So hopefully that theory is right. We'll see if that actually works out for me. And I think that's pretty much it in terms of how much I have spent on this engine. The total is on screen because I haven't added it up. I'm literally writing the script and then I'm editing it, so you'll see it on screen somewhere. Before I go, though, remember at the beginning I said get the most complete engine that you can, because you can sell a whole bunch of parts off of that engine. Well, that's exactly what I did. So now let's subtract out all the things that I sold, and we can actually get the price that I paid to build this engine. So somebody on Facebook Marketplace bought the wiring harness for my LQ9 for $25. Some kid paid me $125 for the engine cover because he wants to convince his friends he has a 6.0 truck and not a 5.3. I wouldn't advise doing that, but sure, give me $125 and you can go be a poser, whatever. Somebody bought my 317 cylinder heads for $100. When I got my LS3 cylinder heads, Economy Auto literally gave me the entire top half of that engine with my cylinder heads. So I actually ended up selling that intake manifold for $100, and I kept the injectors out of it because it had 60-pound injectors in it, which was kind of a bonus. I sold my camshaft for my LQ9 because it's allegedly the same exact camshaft in the LS1. One of my friends bought it for $25 for his 5.3. I sold the original Cathedral Port truck manifold for $50. I actually found somebody who was willing to trade me a Gen 4 truck water pump for a Gen 3 truck water pump. And the reason why that's important is because otherwise the truck water pump and the car intake manifold will touch each other. So I guess this is my for real final total. That being said, this engine's not complete. There's still some things I want to do here and there are a few things I've held back on doing because, well, now I have a YouTube channel. So it kind of makes sense to record doing some of that stuff for content. So you guys will be seeing that in the future. But in terms of next steps, the next video, I'm actually editing it right now, and hopefully you guys will be seeing soon the whole process of 3D scanning and then subsequently me fumbling my way through CAD software to make some engine mounts. So I will see you guys in the next video.